Eddie, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with you. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Appreciate you having me on. I am a Christian, more of a philosophical Christian, not dogmatic or definitely not fundamentalist. Grew up fundamentalist, became apathetic more or less, and then went through kind of a deconstruction and found my way into philosophy of religion and ended up back a Christian. But yeah, I got a YouTube show, Brute Facts on Brute Facts podcast on YouTube, and the all major podcast platforms too.
Awesome. So one of my viewers sponsored me to do a review of this short story and wanted to hear a Christian and atheist perspective. So we're going to watch the short story and then just give whatever thoughts come to mind, pretty much.
Uh-huh.
And off we go.
K. Dick.
Let me know if you guys can hear it.
The dog said. He rested his paws on top of the fence and looked around him.
Yeah,
the Roog came running into the yard. It was early morning, and the sun had not really come up yet. The air was cold and gray, and the walls of the house were damp with moisture. The dog opened his jaw a little as he watched, his big black paws clutching the wooden fence. The Roog stood by the open gate, looking into the yard. He was a small Roog, thin and wide, on wobbly legs. The Roog blinked at the dog, and the dog showed his teeth. "Roog!" he said again. The sound echoed into the silent half-darkness. Nothing moved or stirred. The dog dropped down and walked back across the yard to the porch steps. He sat down on the bottom step and watched the Roog. The Roog glanced at him. Then he stretched his neck up to the window of the house, just above him. He sniffed at the window. The dog came flashing across the yard. He hit the fence, and the gate shuddered and groaned. The Roog was walking quickly up the path, hurrying with funny little steps, mincing along. The dog lay down against the slats of the gate, breathing heavily, his red tongue hanging. He watched the Roog disappear. The dog lay silently, his eyes bright and black. The day was beginning to come. The sky turned a little whiter, and from all around, the sounds of people echoed through the morning air. Lights popped on behind shades. In the chilly dawn, a window was open. The dog did not move. He watched the path. In the kitchen, Mrs. Cardassi poured water into the coffee pot. Steam rose from the water, blinding her. She set the pot down on the edge of the stove and went into the pantry. When she came back, Alf was standing at the door of the kitchen. He put his glasses on. "You bring the paper?" he said. "It's outside." Alf Cardassi walked across the kitchen. He threw the bolt from the back door and stepped out onto the porch. He looked into the gray, damp morning. At the fence, Boris lay, black and furry, his tongue out. "Put the tongue in," Alf said. The dog looked quickly up. His tail beat against the ground. "The tongue," Alf said. "Put the tongue in." The dog and the man looked at one another. The dog whined. His eyes were bright and feverish. "Roog," he said softly. "What?" Alf looked around. "Someone coming? The paper boy come?" The dog stared at him, his mouth open. "He's certainly upset these days," Alf said. "You better take it easy. We both getting too old for excitement." He went inside the house. The sun came up. The street became bright and alive with color. The postman went along the sidewalk with his letters and magazines. Some children hurried by, laughing and talking. About 11, Mrs. Cardassi swept the front porch. She sniffed the air, pausing for a moment. "It smells good today," she said. "That means it's going to be warm." In the heat of the noonday sun, the black dog lay stretched out full length under the porch. His chest rose and fell. In the cherry tree, the birds were playing, squawking and chattering to each other. Once in a while, Boris raised his head and looked at them. Presently, he got to his feet and trotted down under the tree. He was standing under the tree when he saw two Rooks sitting on the fence, watching him. "He's big," the Roog said. "Most guardians aren't as big as this." The other Roog nodded, his head wobbling on his neck. Boris watched him without moving, his body stiff and hard. The Rooks were silent, now looking at the big dog with his shaggy ruff of white around his neck. "How is the offering urn?" the first Roog said. "Is it almost full?" "Yes," the other Roog nodded. "Almost ready." "You there," the first Roog said, raising his voice. "Do you hear me?"
We've decided to accept the offering this time, so you remember to let us in. No nonsense now.
Don't forget, the other added. It won't be long. Boris said nothing. The two Roogs leaped off the fence and went over together just beyond the walk. One of them brought out a map and they studied it.
This area really is none too good for a first trial, the first Roog said. Too many guardians. Now the north side area.
They decided, the other Roog said. There's so many factors.
Of course.
They glanced at Boris and moved back farther from the fence. He could not hear the rest of what they were saying. Presently, the Roogs put their map away and went off down the path. Boris walked over to the fence and sniffed at the boards. He smelled the sickly, rotten odor of Roogs, and the hair stood up on his back. That night, when Alf Kardashian came home, the dog was standing at the gate, looking up the walk. Alf opened the gate and went into the yard.
How are you?
He said, thumping the dog's leg.
You stopped worrying? Seems like you've been nervous of late. You didn't used to be that way.
Boris whined, looking intently up into the man's face.
You're a good dog, Boris,
Alf said.
You're pretty big, too. For a dog, you don't remember long ago how you used to be only a little bit of a puppy.
Boris leaned against the man's leg.
You're a good dog,
Alf murmured.
I sure wish I knew what was on your mind.
He went inside the house. Mrs. Kardashian was setting the table for dinner. Alf went into the living room and took his coat and hat off. He set his lunch pail down on the sideboard and came back into the kitchen. What's the matter? Mrs. Kardashian said.
That dog got to stop making all that noise barking. The neighbor's going to complain to the police again.
I hope we don't have to give him to your brother, Mrs. Kardashian said, folding her arms.
But he sure goes crazy,
especially on Friday morning, when the garbage men come.
Maybe he'll calm down,
Alf said. He lit his pipe and smoked solemnly.
He used to be that way. Maybe he'll get better, like he was.
We'll see, Mrs. Kardashian said. The sun rose up, cold and ominous. Mist hung over all the trees and in the low places. It was Friday morning. The black dog lay under the porch, listening, his eyes wide and staring. His coat was stiff with hoarfrost, and the breath from his nostrils made clouds of steam in the thin air. Suddenly, he turned his head and leaped up. From far off, a long way away, a faint sound came, a kind of crashing sound, as if something were being rolled back, as if a great door were being opened. Boris cried. He stared up anxiously at the darkened windows above him. Nothing stirred. Nothing. And along the street, the Roogs came. The Roogs on their truck moved along, bouncing against the rough stones, crashing and whirring. Boris cried, and he leaped, his eyes blazing. Then he became more calm. He settled himself down on the ground and waited, listening. Out in the front, the Roogs stopped their truck. He could hear them opening their doors, stepping down into the sidewalk. Boris ran around in a little circle. He whined and his muzzle turned once again toward the house. Inside the warm, dark bedroom, Mr. Kardashian sat up a little in bed and squinted at the clock. That damn dog, he muttered. That damn dog. He turned his face toward the pillow and closed his eyes. The Roogs were coming down the path now. The first Roog pushed against the gate, and the gate opened. The Roogs came into the yard. The dog backed away from them. He cried. The horrid, bitter smell of Roogs came to his nose, and he turned away.
The offering urn,
the first Roog said.
It is full, I think.
He smiled at the rigid, angry dog.
Oh, very good of you,
he said. The Roogs came toward the metal can, and one of them took the lid from it. Boris cried, huddled against the bottom of the porch steps. His body shook with horror. The Roogs were lifting up the big metal can, turning it on its side. The contents poured out into the ground, and the Roogs scooped up the sacks of bulging, splitting paper together, catching at the orange peels and fragments, the bits of toast and eggshells. One of the Roogs popped an eggshell into his mouth. His teeth crunched the eggshell. Boris cried hopelessly, almost to himself. The Roogs were almost finished with their work of gathering up the offering. They stopped for a moment, looking at Boris. Then, slowly, silently, the Roogs looked up the side of the house, along the stucco, to the window, with its brown shade pulled tightly down. Boris screamed, and he came toward them, dancing with fury and dismay. Reluctantly, the Roogs turned away from the window. They went out through the gate, closing it behind them.
Look at him,
the last Roog said with contempt, pulling his corner of the blanket up on his shoulder. Boris strained against the fence, his mouth open, snapping wildly. The biggest Roog began to wave his arms furiously, and Boris retreated. He sat down at the bottom of the porch steps, his mouth still open, and from the depths of him, an unhappy, terrible moan issued forth, a wail of misery and despair. Come on, the other Roog said to the lingering Roog at the fence. They walked up the path. Well, except for his little places around the guardians, This area is well cleared, the biggest Rook said. I'll be glad when this particular guardian is done. He certainly causes us a lot of trouble.
Don't be impatient, one of the Rook said. He grinned. Our truck is full enough as it is. Let's leave something for next week.
All the Rooks laughed, then went on up the path, carrying the offering in the dirty, sagging blanket.
Okay. That was it. So do you have any initial thoughts on the story?
Well, I'm pretty sure there's supposed to be something deeper than what it seemed. So the dog kept witnessing something and trying to communicate that to the people who had no idea what he was trying to communicate. Was it, I imagine because of the garbage can on the screen that it was possibly garbage was the Roog. And if they carried it away, probably garbage men or something. I can see all kinds of different aspects or interpretations of the story. I'm not sure what his intention was.
Yeah, that's what I got too. I think the Roogs were the garbage men, and the offering table was the trash can that was full of food. From a dog's perspective, it's like something very valuable, and so it was a offering table to give to the whatever the people taking it away. And the old guy just thought it was trash, and so his dog was just making noise. And said the statement, "One man's trash is another dog's treasure," kind of a thing.
Yeah, theologically thinking, it would almost seem as if the garbage men and maybe the humans were some kind of gods or aliens or something, and trying to appease them without even being able to understand them, and not being understood in the process. I could see how one could possibly say, maybe it's the confusion and the inability to understand, larger things or spiritual things, yet probably because they're not communicated clearly, something like that.
Yeah, I was thrown off by the narration of the garbage guys. The fact that he ate a eggshell, that I found that a little weird. Didn't see that happen. So it was hard to picture what was going on. So I pictured as the dog just making up a storyline of what these people were saying, probably not understanding or something along those lines. But I can definitely see if there's any like philosophical religious implications, kind of like the allegory of the cave, where the dog sees the figures and tries to understand, is that what's really there? And the shadows he sees is very different from what's on the outside of the cave.
Yeah, I love Plato's cave when you really ponder it and think about all of the different, kind of ideas you can get from it. Of course, there's the obvious issue, not the world that you experience every day that's all you know. The way things look to you, whether it is that way or not, they appear to you a certain way. Being totally ignorant of what they really are. And what I like about it is it's when I talk to people about when they ask, why I'm a theist, why I'm a Christian, and things like that, I kind of like a Plato's cave thing. You know, we're in two separate caves, and I can't explain or articulate, you know, the intuition or the seeming that I have, you know, of something existing. And so it just comes out in, you know, trying to relate um, on their level, or, you know, we speak a lot metaphorically, or, you know, using arguments and things like that. But at the end of the day, it just, if someone can't experience what I experience, there's no way I can make it extremely clear, you know, what it is that gives me, you know, some type of confidence.
That's a really interesting perspective. I think that fits really well with the story that religious experience would be like the perspective of the dog of seeing things from a different viewpoint and giving things like the value of the trash can, giving things up that you see as extremely valuable that others don't, kind of like a soul idea where people sin and give up their soul by doing things that don't approve of by God, but they see it as not as very important because they don't see God as real, and so they see it as just trash.
Yeah, that's and of course that's, you know, what you've heard me say, and many people's heard me say, I'm not an apologist. I think it's one of those things that you know, people are going to have their own, and I use the term loosely, you know, their own revelation, whatever it is that you know, reveals to them that, you know, there possibly is something more or something else. But you know, I'll defend what I believe, because I think that, you know, if we have an intuition or things like that, we still have an epistemic duty, you know, to make sure that they're rational, defensible, you know, things like that.
For sure. Any other thoughts come to mind about the story?
I'd like to know who his weed man is. No, it was creative, but I don't know who was the author. Do you know anything about the author? Or?
Philip K. Dick. He wrote
Oh,
lots
yeah.
of stories. Old
Was he
guy,
like
dead guy.
dead guy? Does he like write? I mean, is it like considered science fiction or just fiction, or you know?
He does a lot of science fiction. He did a lot of science fiction. He was born in 1928.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, it's
Yeah, he
pretty
wrote a lot
good.
of short stories.
So, do you think? I mean, does it not seem like some kind of like alien story that, um, you know, these aliens are like he's given the offering to appease the aliens that are coming from nowhere, and
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably what it would look like from like a dog's perspective. They have a giant metal box ship thing that comes and picks up all of the food that you were totally looking forward to eat. And that would be analogous from the dog's perspective of how humans would define aliens and the cow abductions.
yeah, I would. I live in an area where you know, there's quite a few alleged Roogs, so that's uh yeah, it's definitely an interesting story for sure.
Cool. What else have you got going on? What have you been up to?
Mm. Well, I haven't had a show in a while. Kind of took a short break and was working on a series on epistemology. And I had Rob Coombs on Monday where we talked about Aquinas's 5 ways. Just kind of dove into each one of them and let him explain, you know, where he thinks people make errors with them, and the little bit of the metaphysics and thoughts behind it. It's pretty interesting. Me, like most others, you know, first glance, just they don't seem very convincing. Um, but you know, delving more into the metaphysics, I can see, which it's far from me to say that I have a full grasp of Aquinas's or Aristotelian metaphysics, but um, I can see the deeper you get into it, how, you know, he possibly came up with these But it's definitely interesting. Thomism itself it's kind of like a deep, dark hole. It's hard to climb your way out of.
So you said you're working on a series on epistemology, something you
Yeah.
haven't published yet?
Yeah, I'm doing I'm going to start a a series on my channel called 10-Minute Philosophy, and it's going to start with epistemology. Not cramming as much information as I can into 10 minutes, hitting the most important parts of it, but yet in a way where the layman can understand, because I'm a total layman. So going through what epistemology is, what justification, warrant, internalism, externalism, all these different terms that people hear all the time in regards to epistemology.
Yeah, there's a couple pretty big channels that do that. I know there's one philosophy one I follow that does like the 30-second explanations or something like that.
Carneades.
Yeah, Carneades.org. That's it.
Love it, man. I've learned half of my philosophy or the terms or the theories from Carneades. That dude is spot on, man. I mean, the amount of knowledge that he has is unreal.
Actually, he had a poll once where he asked a bunch of questions, and if you get the most interesting question, he gave you a prize. I won some of the prizes.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, he breaks it down, so simple. Of course, got to be careful because some things just, as they're broken down simply, are just complex. So, yeah, I subscribed to his channel years ago. I just ran across it looking up a epistemology term, and I was like, 30-second philosophy, yes, and it's broke out into series, yes, and topics, and yeah, it's fantastic.
For sure, that kind of content is definitely useful. Oh, and they added that new feature thing, the what's it called? The giving thanks, the one where on videos that you upload that aren't live streams, people can now give money, put like super chats in on the comments.
Wow, that's cool.
So if you're eligible for monetization, you can now turn that on, which is interesting.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, I got about 250 to go. Maybe one day I'll get there. I don't know why, but on the actual podcast platforms, it's far more successful. I got tons and tons of subscribers and thousands of downloads, but
Oh yeah,
yeah, I don't know what the issue with YouTube is, but it is what it is. Maybe my
how
audience.
do you upload to podcasts? Do you have a way to upload to all of them automatically, or do you have to manually
No,
upload each video?
So I did it the wrong way. So I'm going to tell you the right way. So you can get monetization. So I used Simplecast, and what you do is you connect your Simplecast to all of the different. It'll give you a whole list of platforms, and basically when you upload it to Simplecast, it distributes it to all the rest of them, Apple, Google, all of those. But they don't do monetization. So I'd recently learned about where's it at? Anchor, which is owned by Spotify. And after you do the same thing there, you upload the audio of the show, put your descriptions in, hashtags, all those things, connect it to, Apple and all these different ones, and it automatically sends it out. Well, as you gain, they have what's called the estimated audience size. As it gains, once you get to, I think it's like 10 estimated audience, they start paying you based on the size of the audience. Of course, it's a little at the beginning, but the more that it grows, the more you get paid. And there's not anything else you have to do other than get the audience there.
Nice.
Yeah,
Do you
I'll
have a way
send you a link to.
Yeah, it's anchor.fm, right? That one.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know a way to automatically upload your YouTube videos to Anchor? That'd be awesome.
Well, I don't know how Restream works, but not automatically, but StreamYard, you can download just the audio to it, and I take the audio. I used to just take the audio from the show and upload it and be done with it, but now I'll cut out like the introduction and stuff like that because people on the podcasts don't care about the intro and all that stuff they can't see. So, yeah, I'll cut it and throw it in there. It takes like 5 minutes.
Nice. Javier Jara has a question for you. Can you see it on the
Yes.
screen?
The best word, that one, the best word for the universal fundament you seek is occurrence. Oh, wait a minute, wrong one. If he knows what is the absolute that is the basis of the possibility and impossibility, yes or no? No.
I think it's a Darth Dawkins question. He's trying to.
That's what
Paraphrase.
the sentiments of Darth Dawkins came to my mind. That was, yeah, that guy, man. I'm going to be quiet.
Have you invited him on? I mean,
No.
no.
There's enough views on part 1 and 2 with me and him on Tom Rabbits. Just 2 Toms. Yeah, so I just I don't have the patience for him.
So what else? Anything else you've been working on recently? Interested in?
Oh, well. I've been writing a book.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's called The Atheist Christian. Because everybody accuses me of not being a real Christian, and that's and the subtitle is not Christian enough for some, not atheist enough for the others. And it's basically, it's more about, it's kind of like a autobiography, I guess, from just going through, my wife and I had a real rough childhood growing up. And I grew up, in the streets with a bunch of gangbangers and stuff. And by the time I was in my 20s, I'd seen far more than what anybody should have seen. And my life kind of just got turned around and, went on to be a productive citizen of society. And then went on to have quite a few tragedies with my wife and I have experienced. And there's just so much there. I think it would be almost an injustice not to share, at least what one person, has gone through. Because as you and I have talked, and I'm sure others have heard me say, the problem of evil and suffering, the evidential problem or probabilistic problem, is very significant to me. A lot of those times through the tragedies and things was, when it seemed the most that there was no God. And if God's supposed to be an all good being, and, at the worst times, you would expect that those would kind of be the times that, you had some kind of understanding he was present or something like that. And it wasn't. And so, yeah, it's not going to be a long book, probably a few chapters, 6 or 7 short chapters, not too long, but that's modal collapse.
Shane is giving you crap about your background.
Oh, Shane's just jealous. He's jealous of the beard. What does Frank want to know about modal collapse?
Yeah, Frank said ask Eddie about modal collapse. What is modal collapse?
Modal collapse, that's when like God's attributes, or if God is absolutely simple and he's just identical to his attributes, then God could not have done anything different. He must have created, and everything must be the way that it is. And if that's true, then it's no different than, some kind of naturalism. Everything just happened the way it is. Couldn't have been any different. And so, yeah, I think Tomaszewski, and I think even Tomaszewski wrote about why divine simplicity doesn't lead to modal collapse. And then I think Joe, I'm drawing a blank. What's his name? Joe, young philosophy guy.
Schmidt.
Yes. he's even jumped on the Tomaszewski train, arguing against using modal collapse for divine simplicity. But I still don't see how it avoids it.
So you acknowledged modal collapse?
I think it's a problem for divine simplicity. Yeah, it's and it may be that I'm just not as educated enough on that topic because I care, more about philosophy. But I'm starting to get more and more into the theological sides. I think Eastern Orthodoxy makes a lot more sense as far as the existence of God. They hold
Did you just say Jay Dyer? Oh my God.
No, not Jay Dyer. Jay, Tag. Let's see, Tag. Yeah, he should have left that part of the Reformation back when he was reformed. But no, with the the essence and energies distinction and the logi and logos, and they believe in simplicity, but not absolute divine simplicity.
You mentioned how many Christians say you're not a true Christian. Do you see that a lot in Christianity, that most Christians think most other Christians are not true Christians?
A lot, yeah. In Western evangelical Christianity, it's mostly in your conservative, Southern Baptist, Pentecostal, Assembly of God, non-denominational, down on the more conservative end. Yeah, they believe that there are basics of truths that you must hold to be considered a Christian. And I just, correct them and say, no, it means to follow Christ, literally. That I don't have to have a litmus test or this, super complex theology worked out, any of that. I follow Christ, and one of the reasons is for the last, 6 or 7 months, I've been in the camp of being agnostic on the Trinity, because I've seen a couple of decent arguments for it, but a lot of them that doesn't make sense to me, and also agnostic on the incarnation of Christ, whether he was equal to God or God himself, because of my studies into Judaism and who Christ or the Messiah was supposed to be. There's it's not real explicit about the Messiah ever being from God. However, I think the New Testament seems to make it clear that he was equal with God, hence the reason he was killed. So because I'm agnostic on those and I'm not certain or take a position of the Trinity and incarnation, they're like, well, that's basic minimum to be a Christian. And I'm like, really? So what happened that 300-year gap between Christ and Council of Nicaea? There was no orthodoxy there. There was nothing determined. So just because a bunch of old white European men got together and said, oh, this makes the most sense, this is what the church has to hold to, that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't believe there's a church that has any authority over truth and knowledge.
What is it called when the churches split off and have different viewpoints?
Well, you had the Great Schism, and then after that, the Reformation.
That's it. Schisms.
Yeah.
There's the schisms in the
schisms,
churches.
Yeah.
And you think all of those are just ridiculous?
Yeah, well, the Eastern Orthodox, even though they disagreed with the Roman predecessors or contemporaries about the model of the Trinity, they probably would have never split if it wasn't for the allegiance to the Pope, the papal authority, because you can't find, they literally stretch to make the Pope like, this godlike figure. And the Eastern Orthodox was like, no, we're not going to bend to this guy. And, because they literally believe that when he is interpreting catechism or certain issues to go in the catechism under the influence of God's Spirit, he is infallible. So he can't make an error. So once it becomes a dogma in the catechism, that is something that has been decided infallibly. And I'm just like, no, bro, no. That dude eats and poops just like I do, gets sick just like I do, screws up just like I do. So there's no way I'm gonna think that there's this super magical moment that he can't make a mistake.
Frank asks, isn't Eddie's best proof of God a contingency argument?
Well, that's a little misleading. I think that the contingency argument is one of the best arguments for getting to a necessary foundation of reality. Now, getting to God I don't think it gets you to God. I think it's just maybe one piece of the puzzle that, in my opinion, points towards there being a God.
Charles asks, how does Eddie differentiate imagination from reality? Or what method does Eddie use to distinguish imagination from reality?
Good question. I can only go on my experience and what seems to be real to me. In an imagination, I'm using the term specific. Imagination would be something that, I thought of and concocted on my own and kind of tried to maybe put myself in a certain situation or something. But this is not something that I concocted and thought of my own. It's something I'm convinced by. Now it could absolutely be false. But at the end of the day, if it seems to be true to me, it would seem to be irrational to think it's not true, even though it seems to be true.
Charles asks, which of the 36,000 different Christian denominations is the true way? Like, this is the way. We'll say this is the way.
None or all. I don't. It's I stay out of the whole. Most people don't realize that about 90. I'm just throwing a number out there. Just 90-something% of denominations agree on the core issues. It's spiritual gifts, church authority, and how to conduct worship and things like that they disagree on. But you have some out there that you like the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and. I'd never say, I'm not a person who says X is a Christian because, or not a Christian because. I would say they have some really weird theologies. If they say they're a Christian, I'm gonna take them at their word. I'm not, that's between them and Christ. But yeah, I don't do the denomination thing.
So Catholics aren't real Christians?
I didn't say that. No, anybody that claims to be a Christian that's good enough in my book. I can question what their theologies and ideas and things like that is, but who am I to say no? They don't believe. I don't know. Their psychology. I don't know what they're convinced of, what they aren't, and I don't think there's a litmus test that you have to pass. I don't think propositional knowledge is required. In fact, going through David Bentley Hart's book again, and I'm finding universalism more and more convincing. So that'd be another reason a bunch of Christians can say he's not a real Christian.
If the anonymous writers of the Gospels are authoritative, why not the Pope?
It depends on what they mean by authoritative. I just think that they're, I'd probably say the word more accurate or representative of what, Christ taught, or at least those who were around him thought that he taught. The Pope is literally just elected by just a human being elected by a bunch of other human beings who think it. You got to understand that the Roman Church, the Roman Catholic Church, believes they are the one true and only church, and they were instituted by God, and they are the authority over all sacraments, salvational issues, theology. So it's kind of a whole hierarchy of beliefs that they have that leads to, culminating in the Pope.
Thank you for the super chat, Tim. Hendry had a follow up there. He said, "You can say Paul was the first pope, a guy who never met Jesus or had a vision or interpreted the Old Testament and made proclamations on theology. So, what is the difference between Paul and the Pope?"
Yeah. Well, I don't think that Paul was infallible in what he wrote. In fact, I put less stock into Paul than most evangelical Christians do, because today most evangelical Christians interpret Christ's teachings through Paul's understanding instead of vice versa. And I think that's a mistake, because Paul was, if you really understood the personality of Paul, he was a man of extremes. He contradicted himself. He would go from extreme condemnation to extreme grace. He basically said he was a chameleon. He became a Jew for the Jews and became not a Jew for the Gentiles. And I think Paul had good instruction for the churches that he wrote to. However, I think a lot of it was to address specific issues in those churches, not necessarily a 21st century audience. In fact, I'm not one of those who think we can take scripture and apply it to the 21st century. I think there are truths that are there, kind of meta truths or overarching truths that, transcend time. But like when people, Philippians, through Christ, I can do all things. It doesn't mean that that applies to you and your basketball, or your football game or something like that. In fact, that was Paul writing in prison, talking about surviving prison. And that's what it was about. So, yeah, I wouldn't take Paul as authoritative. Matter of fact, if you want to say the Pope was like Paul, that's fine, because I don't think either one of them were infallible and necessarily authoritative.
Thank you for the super chat, Frank. Appreciate it. I don't like beards. Beards are itchy and uncomfortable.
Yes, you go through a serious phase of massive itch, and you got to keep lotion. Yeah, because it'll definitely dry out on you.
All right. What do you think about progressive Christianity? Do you consider yourself a progressive Christian?
Well, there's two aspects of progressive Christianity. There's original progressive Christianity, which would be like the West Star Institute or the Jesus. God, I don't forget it. It's a whole sect of Christianity that basically took everything supposedly supernatural or out, and they believed that the resurrection was more of a spiritual thing. They deny a lot of the core understandings of Scripture. The Jesus Institute, I think it's called. No, Jesus Seminar. That's what it is. And originally, that's what progressive Christianity was. It was more of a skeptical side of Christianity, and didn't take a lot of the supernatural claims or miracles or things. Today, a lot of people think that a progressive Christianity Christian is somebody who cares about social issues and errs on the side of a lot of those things. If that's what they mean, I hold to a lot of the conservative values of Christianity, but I don't think those include what a lot of quote unquote conservative Christians hold to. I don't think there's any reason whatsoever that anybody in the church should be publicly speaking about LGBTQ or suppressing them in any kind of way. It's the church is, if they think that's a sin, the church is supposed to be a place that's a haven and comfort place for quote unquote the sinners or the lost or the hurt. My position on it is that the church is supposed to be a place where we love people and we care for people. we don't pry into what their private, ventures are, or what they do in private. None of that should matter to any church or any Christian. That just because they want to use terms like they're living in sin or carnal sin or things like this. And so my first question is, do you live without sin? Do you not suffer from
Yes.
some kind of carnal sin? Who the hell are you to pick a specific quote unquote sin you think that you don't suffer from, and you want to go and pound that nail in and totally forget about your hypocrisy, your lying, most of them, your porn addictions, your unfaithfulness to your wives or husbands. It's a crock of shit, man. It's the church has lost its way and its purpose. It wasn't to go out and make people feel evil, bad, or something like that. So if that's what they mean by progressive, then yeah, I guess.
Scott asked, would someone who believes who doesn't believe in the flood or the Exodus but believes in the resection be a progressive
Resurrection.
Christian?
No, because I mean, so when it comes to interpreting scripture, I lean towards the Catholic or Eastern Orthodox way, because believe it or not, if it's not considered a dogma in the catechism, which there aren't as many as what people think they are, you're allowed to hold to evolution or 6-day creation. You're allowed to believe in a literal flood, a local flood, or an allegorical flood. They leave the room there for that. And so my position, but you can't, to me, if the resurrection didn't happen, as Paul said, then I mean, it's all in vain. What is the purpose? I mean, if Christ didn't resurrect, why are we, we could just say he's a good moral teacher and move along at that, so I think it is core to a bodily resurrection. I think that's core to being a Christian. But as far as the flood goes, I mean, it's Near Eastern mythology. Which mythology doesn't mean that it's not spurned out of some kind of truth. A lot of people think mythology is totally made up, and it's not what it means. I think it's allegorical. I don't even know if Adam and Eve were real people.
What do you think of the Seth Andrews argument that since Jesus is immortal and the body resurrection is all he really went through, then it wasn't really that Jesus died for your sins. He just had a really bad weekend for your sins.
I haven't heard that one. Yeah, I guess that's one way you could definitely look at it. Really bad. Oh my gosh, Gaspar's here. Go away, Gaspar.
Shane asks, is Eddie a substance dualist and why?
Yes and no. I loosely hold. I mean, if I had a hard position, I would say at this point, I think it's hylomorphism. But I don't necessarily know exactly what the immaterial part of my identity is. I don't know if it's a substance or something like that. I'd totally be on board with some kind of monism. I don't think, or monism. I don't think it's really a theistic issue. It just seems to me that Aristotle's hylomorphism, the distinction between forms and the material, are together the identity of something. I don't think I can be me without the ghost in the machine or the immaterial, whatever the mind or conscious or whatever that is. And I don't think my body is me either. I think it's kind of a conglomerate of both that gives me my identity.
Does Eddie have any non-generic, like the golden rule, advice from the Bible he likes?
Yeah. Judge not lest you be judged, for the measure you use to judge is the measure it's going to be used for you, which is about salvational issues, the very thing we were talking about, me not being a Christian or people saying that. That's why I'd never say that. I'm not God. I don't know what the measure is. Whatever measure I say that you're lost for or not a Christian, then that's the measure is going to be used on me. So that and love your neighbor as yourself and your enemy. I think those are pretty good ethical rules.
Why is it that the only way we have of knowing anything about the Christian God comes exclusively from other people? Revelation is entirely first person singular. To everyone else, it's hearsay. The Matt Dillahunty argument.
Yeah. Why is it knowledge about a Christian God comes exclusively from other people? Well, I mean, the truth be told, almost other than experiential knowledge, almost all of our knowledge comes from other people. It's, we read books that people wrote and we're taught by other, instructors and things like that. I'm not saying that, that your average run of the mill everyday person's, somebody should just put that kind of trust in their authority or anything. But so when I look at Revelation, I look at it in two senses: natural revelation and personal revelation. And that's what I was telling Tom earlier. Until whoever has whatever that personal revelation is, so, if they don't believe or something like that, there's not any argument or anything most likely that's that I'm going to give that's going to convince them. It's going to take a kind of a personal experience. But I think with natural revelation, natural theology, it just seems to me that the way, reality works, everything that's involved with reality, I think the best explanation is that there's something other.
Neko had a response. He said he meant something non-generic. I think that means he interpreted your love thy neighbor as thyself as a generic response. I don't know how to differentiate generic and non-generic in this context.
Yeah, I thought they were pretty specific. The one with especially, judge not lest you be judged. That's pretty specific. Maybe he can explain a little more what he means by non-generic.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe don't wash your hands. The Jesus one.
Yeah, there you go. Wash your favorite people's feet.
How do you differentiate between personal revelation and delusion?
Yeah, good question. I would say that if one is of rational, sane mind, and they seem to, show a pattern of being a rational, sane person, that, I wouldn't say they're necessarily delusional. It's possible. But I would say people usually who have delusions, or it's caused by something, drugs or mental illness or things like that, maybe lack of sleep or things like that. But this delusion, if I was under a delusion of what I believe, that would mean every single day I wake up, I think I'm in a reality that I'm not really in. And then we're going to get down to, solipsism or something like that, because it seems to me that this is the way it is. And, nobody's trying to lock me up for what I think is reality or true and saying I'm irrational. So I don't know if there's like a real litmus test or demarcation there, because I think a lot of people can be under delusions about a lot of things.
Frank says you're his favorite Christian and that you are beloved by both sides of the argument.
I appreciate that, Frank. I really do. I do hear that time to time, and really means a lot to me because it seems like I piss off more on each side, and I kind of feel maybe it's the wrong feeling, but I feel like maybe I'm on the path to some kind of truth if I'm pissing off both sides. Either that or I'm on a lonely path. So it's good to hear people say stuff like that.
J. Vijara asks, if Jesus is God and the Holy Spirit is God, is it fair to say that Jesus and the Holy Spirit drowned babies in the flood?
Oh, man. Oh. That's actually not as bad a question as a lot of Christians would think that it is. I have a hard time believing a lot of the things that are in the Old Testament that people did or allegedly did that God told them to do it. It seems far more likely to me the way the cultures worked at that time. You know, if you won a war, God was on your side. If you lost, God was against you. I think that it's possible a lot of speaking of delusions, they were under the delusion that God told them to do these things. But I take most of it, the Old Testament, there's a lot of the Old Testament that's understanding, the Hebrew, as much as reading as I've done on Hebrew cultures, the Hebrew language, the, Near Eastern cultures and mythologies and storytelling and all of this. I honestly think most of the Old Testament, not all of it, but most of it is probably just mythologies and, allegories to convey certain messages or things like that. But yeah, if Jesus was the Holy Spirit and Jesus was God and the Holy Spirit was God and whatever he said, and he commanded to drown babies, and he really commanded them to do that, and they did it because of
I
that.
think it's global flood, so no commanding. Just like if God drowned the global
Oh,
flood and God is Jesus,
oh,
then
drown
Jesus
babies
drowned.
in the flood. Oh, okay, yeah. I was thinking of something kind of different.
Is there a passage where God commanded to drown babies? Because I would like to know this passage.
I think one just presumes if there was a global flood, there would be babies in the flood. Hey, it could have been a time that there were no babies left, and it was time to. No, I don't believe in a literal worldwide flood. I think that goes against every science that we have on the issue. I mean, think about if there's a worldwide flood, the water would have to be so high that the ark would have been up where the air is so thin and cold, they would have froze to death. They wouldn't have enough air to breathe.
But
Because
Trinity, God and Jesus, if they're the same, and God drowned babies, then Jesus drowned babies. That's a fair argument.
well, it would seem. I mean, if they're one substance and they share the same goals and the same power and all of that, it would seem that follows that Jesus had a part in drowning babies.
But have you thought that the babies? Have you considered the fact that the babies deserved it? The evil babies
They
that
did
don't
pay
pay taxes.
taxes. So this is where I butt heads a lot with my Calvinist friends. No baby ever deserves to die. No baby has ever done anything wrong, terrible, sinful, or anything like that. There is no we're guilty because some couple, did whatever, thousands of years ago. That's bullshit. There's no baby's ever guilty.
All right. Non-generic, as in something that doesn't appear in all religions, that's specific to Christianity.
That's a good one. That's one I'll have to think about. Seems like at least most mainstream religions share a lot of the same kind of moral values. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that offhand.
Frank asked if you would ever go on the atheist experience.
I don't know much about them. Is that the one with Dillahunty or?
Yes.
I don't know if Dillahunty would like me because I don't take dogmatic stances, and claims of certainty and things like that. I don't know. I would probably be up for it.
God just relocated the babies. The S.J. Thomas argument.
God suspended them in the air while he flooded everything else. They were in fancy little protective bubbles.
All right, we've been going for about an hour. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on and
Oh,
do the
absolutely.
review
I
thing.
appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, always enjoy talking with you. When are you going to do the debate event thing at your house where you can have
We,
Eddie's ribs?
you know,
I'm
we
going-
so I was actually seriously thinking about that, trying to get some kind of thing put together, and we had a pretty gnarly storm that came through here and caused a lot of damage to
Ooh.
my shop and everything in the back. So we've got to get all of that built up or fixed and cleaned up. But I don't know, man. We need to really do something. Like, man, we could put, like tents out here and like one of the big tents with chairs and stuff, like a revival. Uh, yeah,
Yes,
man,
like,
I'd definitely love to
the
do it.
church thing. What is it? Which was it? There was a big cult who did that, who had like a big tent in their backyard.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Oh, the Baptists. No, I'm just playing. That's from I love my Baptist friends.
All right. Well, I'm going to go take a nap. Thanks again for coming on. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
definitely, man.
And I'll talk to you later.